Hello everyone, my name is Andrzej Krzywda, I'm from Arkansas, and I know that my channel is growing with more subscribers recently. So maybe there are people who don't know my background yet, and as you can see, I'm not the youngest person in the programming industry anymore. I'm 39 actually, so almost 40. And I was wondering what's the best way of introducing myself and my background. And probably the best way among programmers is to explain which programming languages I've been using over the years and when did I start. So I was one of the people who was lucky to have Atari, I think that was Atari 800 XE edition. What's important was that there was the basic interpreter. So I was around 10 years old, or maybe 9, I don't remember exactly. And my father brought this machine from Germany, and I started playing with this, obviously mostly for games. But then somehow, by some miracle, I was living in a village, and by some miracle, 2 villages away was this kind of programming school, or how to call it, where afternoons we could go there and learn. But I had no idea what we were doing. Overall, I was just waiting for the moment where we could play just computer games. So I learned programming in the meaning that I learned how it looks. So for example, we got the listings and we've had to type the listing into the computer and make it run. I had no idea what those numbers mean, and it was very cryptic. When I was 14 and high school started, I was in the computer scientist profile, and we've had Turbo Pascal. So I learned Turbo Pascal a little bit. But still I wasn't really so excited about it. Meanwhile, around when I was 13, there's a whole story which I will tell you at some other time. I was kind of like a CTO at my family business for my parents. But I wasn't programming, I was mostly kind of like a client for a program for a system. So someone else was programming the system according to my requirements and my father's requirements. And that was Turbo Pascal between 14 and 17 years old. And then when I was 18 I went to the university, and more serious stuff started. So I couldn't say I was a programmer when I went to university, probably not. So at least nothing commercial yet. And when I was 18, the first classes at university started. So I think the first thing I was coding in was C, and I hated it, very cryptic, and I didn't like all the details about freeing the memory and so on. But at somewhere very early, we've had this object-oriented class, introduction to OOP, and Smalltalk was used, and that was kind of amazing for me because suddenly I found a language which was very readable for me, and I couldn't believe that programming could be so pleasure. And I remember that was I consider this the first proper program I wrote, because I wrote this game where you could traverse through a labyrinth, all the mazes and rooms and keys, and finding keys to separate doors. And it was very object oriented, and I was like in love. And I was in love in Smalltalk, and the idea of programming which is very readable to normal people. I could show my roommate what it is, and the roommate studied biology and he could understand that. So that was my first infection of OOP and readable code. And what happened next, and I also loved the idea of Smalltalk and IDE. So that was Squeak. Squeak is the IDE for Smalltalk, and Smalltalk is kind of this integrated environment where you program using living objects. It's not like Ruby where you just write, or Python where you just write code in the text file. It's all part of an image, so you don't know what's the actual representation somewhere there in the files. And that was amazing, and I thought that's the future. But I didn't know the history of Smalltalk, and I didn't realize that actually that was the last years of Smalltalk recognition in the market. At the same time, I've had my class about functional programming, so when I was around 19. And the functional programming class was introduced to us via the standard ML language, SML. I think it's very strict functional programming, very pure. Probably there are some purest ones nowadays, but I remember my professors being very proud about it, and my professor was always telling us in 1999, no one believed him. He always was telling us that functional programming is the future. So I was exposed to functional programming. I can't say I was a fan. Like I was really very much into math at that time and into logic. So I really liked the functional approach with being close to math, but I didn't find it readable. And the readability of programming languages was always important for me. At the same time, I also learned Prolog. So Prolog was really cool because it was like declarative, very logical, very logic-oriented. You had all those clauses and so on. So that was very, very cool. So my knowledge about different programming languages was like broadening and broadening, but definitely Smalltalk was the winner at that time. And when I was 19, so that was 1999, Java was the rebel language to do, and Java was like against everyone, against the Microsoft domination, for example. So my sympathy went into Java, even though I didn't really understand why. Java wasn't so nice as Smalltalk, but that was the thing that the cool kids were doing, and it was OOP more or less, so I did enjoy it. So Java was the language I would consider to be closest to my heart, and I was very close to the community. And back then, 1999, there were really not much about blog posts. It was mostly like forums and some discussion groups. Somewhere in that time, I briefly learned JavaScript, but it was the early times of JavaScript. And in 1999, I've had my first jobs. I didn't consider them serious jobs because they were remote, and at that time it meant non-serious jobs for some reason. So my early experiences with commercial actually work was remote. And that was a combination of ASP with Visual Basic, and later on I switched to Java and Swing. So we were building an administration application with Swing. That's the desktop GUI for Java, and that was a very big e-commerce military shop in Poland. So I was involved in writing some parts of it. Then there was some PHP, and I was involved in building a huge construction-oriented portal in Poland, the Polish market, and I was implementing the kind of calculators for those websites where you can say what are your walls, and those are the holes for the windows, and you can calculate how many things you need to do in order to draw the colors on your walls, for example. They were very popular, and my mistake was to write a generator in PHP, and the code generator generated code in order to generate a code for a new calculator. So when the guy who was telling me, how to implement the calculators, when he learned that this was the generator, he basically bought it from me for some really cheap money, and I wasn't needed anymore. That was really weird. And it's interesting because in 1999 and 2000, that was the years, at least in Poland, where it was after the dot-com bubble, and there was no jobs for programmers. So all the jobs were really low paid, and it was really difficult to afford anything for the money. I was 21, I went to my first real proper job at that time, meaning I went to the office. And that was a Java, proper Java. It was kind of the times of EJB, but it wasn't EJB, the Enterprise Java Beans, but the code was heavily influenced by Enterprise Java Beans thinking. So there was this kind of Java Beans as a pattern, and then I learned about Java, plain old Java objects, so Pojo. That was a time where I was really close to the Java community. The whole Agile was starting. I was a big fan of extreme programming, and I was working on a portal which collected photos for many different parties in the city, and the clubs, they pay for making the photos so that they were more popular marketing wise. Then I was, as a part of the same company, I was working on a recruitment system, and it's funny because it was 2002, so 17 years ago, and my code is still running in production. So I'm kind of proud of it because my friend works there, he's still there, he's the CTO, and I'm kind of proud that it still works. Obviously my code was rewritten in some ways, but overall it's the same. Then I was an interesting switch because I was still a student, and I managed to get to Siemens in Germany, Munich, for 6 months. It was a thing called Werkstudent, where I was working for 6 months, but I was mostly like a research, so very close to between the industry, real like Siemens as a company, but also between academia. So I was after this Werkstudent, after this internship, I was actually preparing to, and I've already had my first academical paper published. So it all seemed that my career would go in the direction of becoming a PhD. That was something I was seriously considering, and I got a really good offer from Canada. And I was preparing to go to Canada. Just at the last possible moment, I decided to cancel it. I decided to cancel it because I think it was a good decision overall. While I'm very close to all the new developments in software engineering in academia, I think I'm closer to the business side of things. And when I was 25, I went to Siemens, but in Wrocław, the branch in Wrocław, and I've used many different things there, including C#, for example, and I wrote a nice small application in C#. But that was the moment when Ruby on Rails appeared. So 2004, Ruby on Rails appeared, and I immediately started using it on my home applications. And then I realized that at my company, there's a whole department for building, the internal applications, and basically what they are doing are typical web apps using CRUD. And I told them that we should use Ruby on Rails, and I was like young and crazy, and they didn't want me to believe. But when I organized a meeting of all the managers and the important programmers and so on, and I basically implemented half of the application using Ruby on Rails in front of them, the same application which was meant to be take 6 months using C#. And I created a bit of drama inside of the company, and in the end it actually worked because they allowed me to take one intern, someone who didn't know Ruby on Rails, and in 3 months we finished one huge application in Ruby on Rails, so that was great. And at the time I also met DHH when DHH was still somewhat not popular, so at the conference in Denmark I was drinking beer just with DHH and my other friend, and no one knew DHH apart from us. Then I switched to Python, so I really wanted to go to London, actually I wanted to go to Dublin, but I didn't find a good job in Dublin, so I found a good job in London, but it wasn't a Ruby job, it was a Python job. But it was interesting because the CEO of the company didn't really make it a big deal that I don't know Python, because he also didn't know Python, it was okay, and there was also one other programmer who didn't know Python, so we were working on Python application. It was Iron Python, so it was like Python for .NET. But I was almost 2 years with Python, and that was after already my experience with Python. So, but even though I liked Python quite a lot, I preferred Ruby. So when I was back from the job at home, I was using Ruby. So Ruby at nights, Python at the day. And then I decided to come back from London to Poland, and I immediately started doing Ruby work first as a freelancer, and then as Arkansas, as a company. So since then, since 2007, means 12 years is only Ruby, but overall I have 15 years of Ruby if we count all the night coding with Ruby. And Ruby is my main technology of choice. Obviously, sometimes and obviously when we talk about Ruby, there's also JavaScript somewhere there. So, but JavaScript is not really my love. It's mostly Ruby, and there were other languages I was trying along the way, but they were of no importance overall. So recently I've been asking on Twitter which technology I should learn, and there was a nice list. So now that you know my background, and that's my ways of saying nice to meet you now. You know me because you know which languages I've been using. So if you enjoyed this video, maybe you can suggest what other technologies I could choose for experimenting with. Not only meaning languages, but yeah, I'm also open for suggestions which language I should learn and maybe document here as a YouTube video. But maybe there are some good libraries in whichever language, so you can suggest a language and a library. I'm very much into chess, so I'm a chess player. You can tell by this book of Garry Kasparov, always somewhere there. So maybe some chess related libraries or whichever thing. I know there's a lot of exciting stuff around AI, so I'm open for suggestions. Recently I learned SonicPy. You can find another video about SonicPy and generating music from the code. So I'm really open for everything. So hello, nice to meet you. I'm Andrzej. I have 20 years of experience. I was a Smalltalker, a Java programmer, and I'm a Ruby programmer. And see you in the next video. Thank you.